Hello and welcome. You are now inside of NotebookLM. And NotebookLM allows you to master any source that you're going to use, whether that source is a physical book, or it is a research article, or it's an internet source. You can get to the bottom of that source and make all of the information in it accessible by using a site like NotebookLM. Now, it is like all other AI internet tools. There are some cautions and there are some practices that you need to undertake in order to get the most out of the source. It isn't going to do everything for you, but it can do quite a bit to, again, make things accessible that may not have been prior to your using an AI source. Process of NotebookLM really does start with adding sources. And you're going to notice that you can add anything from a PDF to an audio to a doc file and everything else that's going to be here. You can also add sources that you already have available in your Google Drive. So if you already use Google Drive and you're using a Google Drive associated with your NotebookLM account, you can pull those sources into Notebook. You can also pull as a source a website. And that website does not have to be yours. It can be a website that you have access to. Not all websites are going to be usable, but many are. You can access a YouTube video and you can make that YouTube video a source that you're going to manipulate. And if all else fails, of course, you can copy in the text directly to an element that allows you to upload text. Now, because you're going to be uploading a number of PDFs to use as sources, that really is a starting place to start thinking about how you want to use NotebookLM. You're now looking at a site called $1 Scan, and $1 Scan is like many other sites. It's not the only one that is available. It allows you to send a hardback book to $1 Scan. They will then scan that book into a PDF. They will then destroy the book and then send you a PDF. And the reason that they destroy the physical book is so that they are free from any element of copyright infringement. So you would not have two copies of the book if they did not have permission to copy the book. Pricing on a site like these are all over the place. They vary. So if you're going to use a site like $1 Scan, you want to just be certain that it's going to be one that you're comfortable with. You don't have to use this one. If you go to your favorite search engine and you type in book scanning service, you can actually get the service that's going to be right for you. If you find yourself using a number of scanned books, you can get a reliable source and then scan it yourself using book scanning technology. A book scanner will typically allow you to scan a 300-page book in about 15 minutes and to produce a PDF copy of that book. It'll have OCR in it so that it is searchable and it'll be usable for you inside of NotebookLM. So this is another way for you to take non-internet sources that are not available on the web and then use them in NotebookLM to make the information in them accessible to you. In some cases, you may have an old audio. As long as you can get that audio into an MP3 format, you can upload that source to NotebookLM. And NotebookLM will do the transcription for you to make it usable for you inside of the platform. Same thing is going to be true with an MP4. It doesn't have MP4 on there, but you can upload an MP4, and what NotebookLM is going to do is going to strip out the audio and produce some kind of transcript for you, and then make that information available to you to use as a source in NotebookLM. So again, the starting point for everything is going to be to have reliable sources that you're going to be uploading to NotebookLM. These are going to be the sources that you know of that you're going to be using inside of NotebookLM. Once you have a source and it is uploaded to NotebookLM, you're going to notice that if you click on top of that source, that NotebookLM will then summarize that source. And it will make that content available to you here. And again, you're going to see a transcript. It's not necessarily going to be directly usable, but you could copy this entire transcript and you could use it in some other format. You will see here on the left side that, again, NotebookLM will allow you to go and get your own sources to add them. It's just another way of being able to do it, to do what is called fast research and to do what is called deep research. Whether we do fast research or deep research, NotebookLM is going to go and get the sources, and we can potentially add those sources inside of NotebookLM. But again, if you're looking for reliable sources, you typically want to start with sources that you already know. Now, there are two ways to use NotebookLM. One way to use NotebookLM is to use a chat and to have a chat conversation. And this will be the typical way that you would use an AI. So if you type in a question, you're basically questioning all of the sources that you have here. You're not questioning the AI and questioning the internet. You're questioning the AI's interpretation of all of the sources that you have placed here. So the universe inside of NotebookLM is closed. It's closed to the documents and sources that you have uploaded unless you expand those sources by using this top box here to add in more sources. But again, the universe is going to be closed inside of NotebookLM to only the sources that you have made available. Once you understand that fact, what you can do is you can begin to ask questions of the specific sources. It's a good idea to start your query asking what the courses or what the sources actually say. Don't necessarily want to start with a question that you're trying to answer unless that's what you want the AI to do. You typically want to know that it's going to go to the source in order to answer your question. So I can type a question here into the dialog box. And really, when I type this question in, I'm asking NotebookLM to give me an answer based on all of these sources together. And so, as you can imagine, with the AI is doing quite a bit of summarization in order to give you that answer, it is one that you can do, even though it probably is not necessarily going to be recommended if you want exact information. If you're looking for exact information, one thing that you can do is you can go and untick all sources. And what you can then do is you can then check off one source. So then your query here inside of the chat area is only going to be based on one source. Again, if we go and we select all sources, your query is going to be based on a compilation of all 36 sources. If I tick this off and turn back on, it's going to be based on one source. And so all of the information that you get back is going to be based on its answer and its scan of the information in this one source. You want to use this feature to your advantage. So instead of uploading a long PDF to NotebookLM and using only that one PDF, one thing that you want to do is you want to break the PDF into as many logical parts as you can. Now, in some cases, your book will have bookmarks. For example, if we were to click on the bookmarks, we can then see that there is one chapter, and we know where that chapter begins. We then know where the second chapter begins. And generally, what we can do is we can decide then that we're only going to print one chapter. And so in this case, we're going to click on the printer. We're going to turn on our PDF printer, whichever one you have. If you have a Mac or if you have something like Adobe, you can turn on whichever printer that you have. You're going to print a certain number of pages. In this case, we're only going to print pages 8 through 15 because that's chapter 1. And that's what we want to do. We want to print these in as small of an increment as we can because we can always ask for NotebookLM to look at them all together by checking off the box. But we may want to go in depth into a chapter and we may want to get an in-depth understanding of that chapter and we may have to actually go back and reread that chapter. So we want to be able to present or print the chapters in as small of increments as we possibly can or that time will allow. We can do the same thing with scientific research papers. In this particular case, you'll notice here that the research paper doesn't necessarily have bookmarks that we can look to. However, we can look to these specific sections and we can print these in the small sections that we want. So if we want to do this section by section, we can do it and we'll just print off the pages that we want. Now, one thing that you want to be aware of is that the pages don't always necessarily match up with the pages in the PDF, right? So you'll want to make sure that you're only printing according to the pages that the PDF states and not necessarily the pages from the research article. And what this means then is that you can actually take any of the sources and you can add them together. So for example, if we were to use one book and all the chapters in one specific book, we can tick them all together. We can ask our question of the 4 sources or 4 chapters. Or we can focus in on one chapter at a time. So if you're having trouble understanding one particular chapter, you want to focus in on that one chapter. then that's where you want to use your source, and you want to start asking questions of the AI about that specific source. Now, depending on which level of account that you're going to have in NotebookLM, the chat area does have configuration elements. So if I click on this button and I have a pro account, one thing I can do here is I can configure the chat. So I can configure the chat by giving it a style or role. I can customize that role by prompt. And this is something that you're just going to want to test. And you probably don't want to use other people's prompts, especially if you're going to be generating your own kind of learning inside of NotebookLM. Or you can just go with the learning guide, which is the default. And in most cases, longer is not necessarily better. And in some cases, what an AI will do is it'll try to come up with longer information and it'll put filler in there. So the default setting is typically going to be fine. If you don't like the default setting, you can go shorter. If you really do want to see what longer will produce, you can check and see if longer will produce. But in general, default or shorter tends to work out in terms of trying to give you an understanding of the information that you are seeking. And so in this case, for this specific element, we're just basing our question on one source because that's all that we have ticked off here. We can then click on one source. And what the chat will do is the chat will then interact with our question just as you would any other AI, and it's going to attempt to give you an answer. Now, NotebookLM, you're going to notice here that you're going to notice some numbers. And if you click on those numbers act as citations. And so if you want to know how NotebookLM came up with the answer that they're giving you here, they're going to be able to point you back to the individual source that actually gave them the confidence that what they're answering you is correct. And this is another benefit of using one very small source at a time when you are questioning in the chat something that you want to glean from that information, right? So if I click on this element, that's going to show me where inside of the source, this one source, it actually went to get this information, right? If I click on that source, it'll then show me the paragraph that gives them the confidence to give me that answer. Now, if you like the interaction that you have here, what you can do is you can save this to a note. If you click on save this to a note, you're pinning this inside of the studio area to use for later. Now, what NotebookLM can do is you can then delete your entire chat history, or you can use that chat history and leave it there. And it's always going to be private to you. So you will not necessarily be giving anything away unless you allow someone to use your specific notebook for another purpose. Now, up from there, you're going to see two buttons at the top, Analytics and Share. If you click on this share button, this will allow you to give other people access to your notebook. And that's where it's going to be relevant that your chat history is going to be private to you. That's even if you share this information with other people. So again, so if you're going to be using your notebook, you're going to be sharing information, and you have a chat that you think is worthy to share with other people, you want to share that to a note, and you then want to make sure that note's going to be in the sources. If you don't want to have it, you can always go to this element and you can delete the note. Right, then the note will not be there. We click this share button, this will allow us to share with other people. We can either make it so that access is going to be restricted, or we can give access to anyone with the link that we're going to give them. We can then also choose what kind of access you're going to have to the notebook. We can give them access to the chat only or everything else in the notebook. So again, if you're going to give them access to the chat only, again, your chat are going to be private, and then that individual will then be able to interact with your sources. They won't necessarily be able to see anything else that you have done. We're going to close out of this share button, and we're not going to be sharing with anyone at this point. You want to be aware of the settings here at the top. The help screen is very helpful and will give you tips on how to use NotebookLM. It's a good idea to go through all of the help screens that will give you insight on what NotebookLM was designed to do and how it can help you. If you have feedback for the NotebookLM team, this is something that you can send here. They do read their feedback and they do take the customers and clients that they have. They take them seriously, and there are many cases where people have made suggestions in NotebookLM and they have taken it. If you really want to be engaged with the people that are using NotebookLM and the community, you can always use a site like Reddit where people are talking about NotebookLM, but the most active members in influencing what NotebookLM does happens inside of the Discord. You're going to be using NotebookLM in a specific language, and in most cases, if you might be using English. However, you can use other output languages if yours is available. So you're going to be checking that here. You're going to see a licensing. This is not necessarily something you need to be concerned about. This is kind of internal to NotebookLM. You can change the way that you use NotebookLM. You can use it in light mode, dark mode, or device mode. And then if you have a paid subscription to NotebookLM, you can manage that subscription here in this area. Now that you understand how to manipulate the sources that are going to be here on your left side, what you can do is you can make any source accessible by creating an audio overview. And so again, this is really where it's going to be crucial that you break down your sources in as small of an increment as you can. You don't want to upload entire research papers, entire grouping of research papers, an entire textbook. Instead, what you want to do is you want to upload specific chapters or specific halves of chapters or specific parts of research papers. This will really give you leverage when you're using the studio and you're creating assets that will help you to understand the material. So there are elements inside of the studio, and if we have one of the elements ticked or two of the elements ticked, we can first implement what's called an audio overview. Now, audio overview has 4 different ways in which you can create an audio. And what the audio does is it gives you an understanding from the perspective that you are asking for. And so you want to influence what the AI hosts will discuss by writing in what you want them to talk about here in this area. Now, it's a good idea that before you start relying on NotebookLM, that you get a feel for what the hosts are going to do. They're going to be 2 individuals that are going to be discussing this particular topic. They can discuss it in the form of just giving information, doing a deep dive. They can do a bite-sized overview. They can do a critique of the sources, or they can do a debate. And so all of these are available to you depending on how you want to use NotebookLM. And you can be as extensive in your prompt area as you like to be here in this area. We're going to stick to deep dive, and we're then going to click generate. Now again, in this particular case, the rule that we discussed, long is not necessarily better. And so you can generate long audios, and sometimes what you'll see is that the AI is going to repeat itself. It's also going to be putting things in formats that may or may not give you the information that you want. Default or short tends to give you the information in as bite-sized as an element as you can. And once again, this is where you benefit from breaking things down into small increments when you are uploading your sources. So in this case, we're not going to change the default setting. We're then going to click deep dive and click generate. And you're going to see that this generation element is then going to start the process. And while this is generating, we're going to move on to some of the other ways that the studio can help you. So once again, we then have one source connected. Again, we could do multiple sources if we wanted to, but we're just going to do one for the sake of this video. And another thing that we can do is if you are a visual learner, you can create a mind map of one specific source. And so we can then click on the mind map. Now again, you could take all of the sources together for a specific single volume. So if you had chapters 1 through 10, you can take chapters 1 through 10 to do a mind map, and maybe that might be helpful, or you can just focus on one chapter at a time. Now, what you're going to notice then is that the mind map is going to be interactive. If you see this and it's not necessarily going to fit on your entire screen, you may want to pull this over or zoom out some so that you can see it. Right? We can see the entire mind map. We can click on the element here, and we can see the other elements, and we can see how the mind map expands. So again, what we have here is a mind map based on one source. And we can do this as many times as we want, in as many cases that we want. Now, when you download this mind map, it's not going to be interactive, but what you can do is you can download each page. So for example, all we wanted to do was we just wanted to have this part of the mind map. We could download this into a PNG file, and then we'd only have this part of the mind map. And if that gives us the insight that we want, we can use it in that way. So that's what the mind map actually does. We're going to shrink this, go back to the studio. What you're also going to see is that there are specific reports that we can run. And again, now we're using one source. We can click on the reports button. And when you click on the reports button, you're going to notice here that you can format the report. And this is going to be a written document however you want. So we can create your own report, a briefing doc, a study guide, or a blog post. We can also do an executive summary, case study, concept explainer, or Socratic dialogue. And again, it really depends on the kind of document that you want. And so if you choose any one of these documents, you're going to click on the pencil. And this is where you're going to write in your prompt for that specific kind of document. Right? So this is where you're going to demonstrate what it is that you want to have inside of your document. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to click on reports. I'm going to decide that what I want is going to be an executive summary. And then I want the executive summary to be something specific. Right? So we do have that. What we can then do is we can then click generate. And you're then going to start to see that the source or the written report is then going to generate. What you'll notice now is that our audio report has now been generated. And you're going to see two buttons here, and you're going to see interactive mode and you're going to see play mode. Now, if we play the audio, it's just going to play, and we're going to see it play here in our screen.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your stack of source material, rip out all the fluff, and really just leave you with the crucial, most surprising nuggets of insight.
Yep.
Today, we're diving into some incredibly high stakes. We're talking organizational failure, immense pressure, and the near impossibility of selling truly game-changing.
Okay, so this is how the audio will then sound, and you'll notice here that the audio is going to be about 13 minutes. And if we like the audio, once we've completed it, we can download it. And in fact, one good reason to download it could be that we really want to fact check this download. I'm going to X out of this. Another way to interact with the audio is to click the hands button. That's interactive mode. And this is where we can talk audibly with NotebookLM about this audio. And so what we're going to do is we're going to then click on interactive mode. And what you're going to do is you're going to then see a series of things that you're going to click on. Now, this is going to bring up this screen. And in order to activate the interactive mode, we need to click on play audio. And then we're going to need to click on join. We will then need to listen to the audio, and then we're going to interact when we feel it is appropriate. So first, again, we're going to play the audio.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your stack of source material, rip out all the fluff, and really just leave you with the crucial, most surprising nuggets of insight.
Yeah.
Today, we're diving into some incredibly high stakes. We're talking organizational failure, immense pressure, and the near impossibility of selling truly game-changing expertise.
It's a great topic. The sources for this dive are built around... Whoa, did someone just break the fourth wall? Let's hear it.
Can this information be applied to individuals that are selling their expertise or solopreneurs that sell their expertise in addition to doing their solopreneur business?
That is a phenomenal question.
Okay, let's unpack this right now.
The short answer is an emphatic yes.
Absolutely. The whole story we're about to tell is a massive lesson in selling expertise.
In fact, the source material explicitly deals with the struggle of experts.
It's the difference between being a maven and being someone who can monetize that knowledge.
Many experts struggle to sell online, even if they've solved million-dollar problems in their lifetime.
They may
So as you can see, you can choose either way of interacting with the audio. You can just listen all the way through, and then you can come back and you can interact with the audio in specific places. And it's a good idea that while you interact, that you have your own note taking. You can click on your own notes and you can take your own notes here in this area. Now you do have full autonomy. And so if we just click on this element and we go back to the studio, you'll see that there are your notes there. You can click on them again and your notes will then be there. And you can take notes as you interact with the specific audio. You're also going to notice now that the document has now been completed. So we can click on top of that document and we can now see our document. Our document is now complete. And if what we want to do is we want to copy this to our word processing document, we can click on copy and we can now send that document to our Microsoft Word element or to our Google Documents. We can also go to this element and you'll notice here that we can take that document and we can export it to Google Docs. So that's another way for us to take those memos, the ones that are created by NotebookLM, and then to move it to a document. And if at any time what you want to do is you want to go back and trace your steps, what you can do is you can go to the ellipsis. You can then see the prompt you used in order to create the document. Right? So if you want to create another element, you want to know which one worked best, and you want to know what you used in order to create the document. You won't see that happen with a mind map because the mind map did not come with the ability for you to customize. And you don't have to do this, but you want to think something similar and you might say, well, I'm pretty happy with the answer that I was able to get for the audio overview. Well, I'd like to see a video done. And so I can then click on and I can start with the video concept. I can put in the same prompt and I can choose the kind of video that I want. Now, again, there are two kinds of videos. I can do an explainer video or brief video. And then I can choose the style that I want, the style of images that I want. And then I can click generate. And the video overview is going to start that process. So while the video overview is starting the process, you're going to notice then that there are some other elements inside of the studio that I can use in order to make sure I really understand the material. And so one thing I can do is I can use flashcards. Now, the flashcards in this particular case, you can have more or less flashcards, and it really depends on how much you want to really understand if you know what's been discussed, right? So you can just leave the default setting for the first time, and then you can judge based on what it produces for you, whether or not you want more or fewer cards. Typically, the cards are going to be pretty easy. You can leave the default setting. If you want them to be harder a second time or third time, you can go back and make them harder. And then you can then write in a prompt to give you the kind of flashcards that you want. We can then click generate. Our flashcards will then be generating. And we can do the same thing with a quiz. And so as opposed to having flashcards where we get to see the answers, we can then also have a quiz. And the quiz is going to be pretty much the same thing, except for we're going to need to answer questions and we're not going to have the opportunity to assure our answer is going to be correct. And so this will really give you a sense for whether or not you understand the source. And this is, again, is going to give you an advantage if you are breaking down your sources in minute detail. So again, rather than just upload one entire research paper or one entire textbook or one entire book, you want to upload micro sessions and you want to upload very small instances to make sure you really do understand the content or the concept in that one element. And what some individuals will do is they will skip trying to get a handle on whether or not they understand it through an audio overview or a video overview. One thing that you can do to make sure you really understand something is skip straight to the flashcards or the quiz. And all you're really trying to do then is you're trying to make sure, well, hey, do I really understand this? Do I really get what's being said here? And do I get it from the perspective that I'm trying to determine? Now, again, I can go to these ellipses. I can look at my custom prompt. I can click on the flashcards. And so each of these flashcards, if I click on them, right, will give me the answer. So it's one way for you to prepare for the quiz. And our quiz is now complete. I can now click on the quiz. And basically now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to answer the questions based on our understanding of the book. And the question is going to be, do you really understand the book or book chapter or section of the research paper that you have set forth inside of NotebookLM? And if you really do understand it, you should be able to answer some questions given to you by the AI. So the AI can really help you determine if you really do have a handle on this information. There is a hint here, right, that we can use to our advantage. Okay, so our video overview is now complete. We can see a few minutes of this, and you'll be able to see this explainer.
All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to tackle a problem I think we've all felt, that absolute chaos of project management. Let's just dive right in. I mean, seriously, why? Why does it feel like every single project is late, over budget, and just ends up in this big round of finger pointing? We've all been there, right? The project starts with all this excitement, and then boom, it goes completely off the rails, and everyone starts blaming everyone else. And the excuses. Ugh, the excuses are classic. This quote just nails it, doesn't it? It's all somebody else's fault. You know the drill. The official story is always something you couldn't possibly have predicted. Oh, the weather was bad. The vendors let us down. The Malaysian government. It's the perfect way to wash your hands of it and say, hey, not my fault. But here's the thing that gets buried under all those excuses. The actual, real-world financial hit. Look, delays don't just hurt a project's bottom line. They absolutely crush it.
Okay, so you can see what happens. What the video overview does is it's really designed to give you an overview of the entire process. And so again, the key to the process isn't so much the assets and what it produces, it's breaking things down in as small of an element as you can and trying to glean understanding. Now, you are going to be time pressed, so you may not have time to watch and generate, let's say, 10 chapters for one book. Or you may not have time to generate 4 audio overviews, listen to them in real time for one research article. So in some cases, you're going to have to use one source. But again, the best possible way to really master and understand, if you understand a source, if you're going to use NotebookLM and if you're going to use AI, is to do it in the way in which we have outlined, in this session, which is to break it down into as small a source as you can, and upload those small sources. So let's say that you do want to add in sources from the web. And in the case where you're going to use deep research or fast research, you can ask for the kind of sources that you want. So in this case, we're going to make sure that we have the web selected. We're going to do deep research. Now, the difference between deep research within NotebookLM and deep research in a regular AI like Gemini or with ChatGPT is that NotebookLM is going to give you the underlying sources, and you can decide on which of those underlying sources to add to your notebook. So instead of just giving you the report, it's going to give you the sources also. So let's do one deep research query. Now, when I query using NotebookLM, this is going to take time to undertake. So this is not going to be an instant process. You're going to want to set this in motion if you're going to use deep research or even if you're going to use fast research, and then walk away and go do something else. And then you want to come back to this once it's going to be complete. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this in motion, and then we're going to walk away from this process. We're going to stop the video. We're not going to watch this in real time. Come back at the end once this is complete. You'll notice then that the deep research is then going to be completed. What you'll want to do is you'll then want to click on the View button. That's going to open up this source element, and you're going to see quite a bit here. Now, one of the things you're going to notice is that you're going to have an entire report, and that report is going to be based on the deep research. Now we can choose to import that report into our sources. Now what you can also import into the sources area are going to be all of the sources that were used to create this deep research report. And you're going to see all those sources here in this area. And in most cases, this is going to be valuable information because if you were looking for a concise report, but you want to know how it was made up, you'll see all those sources here. In addition to that, you're going to see all the sources that were found that were not cited. And so these may be relevant, however, they were just not cited in this specific deep research report. So this deep research is going to give you even more insight onto the sources that you have decided to generate. And you have full control over which ones or which one you bring into your NotebookLM notebook. You should now have enough information to begin mastery of any subject that you want. We did not mention the slide deck, and this is going to be a visual version of the content that you are looking for. So for example, if we were to go back to just the one source, and then we were to click on the edit pencil for the slide deck, and we were to use one of our previous prompts, we can then create a slide deck or we can create presenter slides, either one. So again, we can then click generate. And what you'll see then is that NotebookLM will then create a slide deck or PowerPoint presentation. Now the slide deck is going to be delivered to you in PDF form. Very similar to the slide deck, we can create an infographic. The infographic is going to be one image versus multiple image for the slide deck. We can make it detailed. We can make it the shape that we want. And we can then generate an infographic also. And again, this will help you if you're more visually oriented. So with that, thanks and have a great day.